Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Afrovibes Festival, and welcome to the Balie. And for the people watching at home, welcome. My name is Richard Kofi. I'm an artist, curator, and founding director of the Museum of Black Futures. And in this hour, I have the honor of having have a conversation with two wonderful people. And we're here in the context also of a wonderful performance that we're going to see by Buhle Ngaba. Mm-hmm. And my other guest is also a world-renowned curator, also dealing a lot with these topics of restoration, or repatriation, restitution. And I think that some of the things that we have in common is that there's also a very spiritual aspect to our work, like a sort of spiritual reparation. Shout out to Femi Dawkins, who coined that name. And that's basically what our conversation is going to be about. And because this has such a spiritual component to it, before I start with the introductions to you, I'd actually like to address the audience to briefly, while we are going through these introductions, also think of why we are here, or better yet, how we got here. Where did you start? What was your journey? And how did we end up here? I think that's an important thing to take into account, because some of these topics that we are going to address are deeply personal, despite the fact that they're about heritage and art and institutions and all these big ideas. There's a very personal and spiritual aspect to it. And I hope that within the next hour we get to touch upon that. And also, just as a starter remark, Buhle, you have to leave a little bit early to get ready for the performance, also because it's so personal, I guess. So we're going to start a little bit early with audience questions, and if you have to leave, you have to leave, and then we'll pick up the conversation and continue on. So, yes, let's go. First off, let me introduce you. My first guest is multi-award-winning South African actor, writer, and theater activist, Buhle Ngaba. I want to know all about that theater activist thing in your bio. And in all her work, she experiments with new forms of storytelling, unearthing and amplifying African women's voices from the archive. Very interesting. She's in the Netherlands because of Bling, like I said, and the performance will be here tonight. And I'm also very curious to hear your thoughts about what it means to you that this performance is here now, also regarding the history that you're uncovering in Bling. So very much looking forward to that. And my other guest is Hisham Khalidi. He's a curator working internationally, globally, with wonderful projects, really interrogating our institutions, but also what institutional responsibility is, I think. I think that's a big part of your practice. You're currently the director of the Jan van Eyck Academy, and you were obviously also involved with the Venice Biennial.
Last year, yeah.
Yeah, last year. And talking about aspects of reparation and restoring and criticizing our arts infrastructure, I think that this would lead to this could be a conversation in itself, just like Bling. So we're going to kind of fit in all the puzzle pieces. So thank you all for being here. And I'd like to start with you, Buhle.
Yeah.
Where did this story, what is Bling about, and where did it start for you?
Yeah, so Bling is about the return of the Cullinan diamond to South Africa. The long and short of it is, after Queen Elizabeth died, I saw that on TikTok and on Twitter, there was a lot of demand, particularly from South Africans and the African continent as a whole, really being like, we want our diamond back, we want our diamond back. Coincidentally, so I'd been thinking about that, and then a few months later, coincidentally, Beyonce and Jay-Z released a campaign called About Love for Tiffany & Co. And I looked at it and I saw that Beyonce was wearing a very large yellow canary diamond. And I immediately went, oh wait, that's definitely my diamond, because that diamond was mined in Kimberley, the Northwest in South Africa, which is where my family is from. Mm-hmm. And I did a little bit of research, and I saw all of the very famous women who have worn this diamond before: Lady Gaga, Audrey Hepburn, the list goes on. And I felt very strongly that the person who should actually be wearing this diamond is me. And it seemed so that thought in and of itself made me laugh. So I decided to take it a step further and I went, okay, fine. What would happen if I got to wear the diamond? So I decided to create my own campaign in my little studio where I replicated Beyonce's dress, her hairstyle. I put up a blue sheet at the back and I took photos having created a very big origami gold diamond. And I put out a press release on Instagram and it said, actor Buhle Ngaba will be wearing the diamond that was mined in her hometown. A short film will be coming out called About Independence, etc., etc. And I just put it out as a joke, but I didn't say that it was a joke. And it was really wild to me to find people were really excited about this and they congratulated me. And it was so ridiculous because I was like, I am very clearly wearing paper. This is insane. But people were so willing to invest entirely in this story that I decided to take it another step further. And I went, okay, cool. So if I don't get to wear the diamond now, what would happen if the diamond returned? Mm-hmm. Then I decided, okay, cool, not that diamond. Let me go for the biggest diamond of them all. And then I went, okay, it makes sense. It has to be Cullinan. It has to be the Cullinan diamond. So then I said, okay, what would it be? And what would she be like if the Cullinan diamond were to finally return to South Africa? How would she encounter history then? What would her point of view be within the archive? Because I'm also an archivist and I'm always looking for new lenses and ways to tell stories. So I just thought that her point of view would be very interesting because there's human time and then I say then there's diamond time. Diamond time is billions of years. Mm-hmm. She's watched all the wars happen. She's watched the worst of us as humans play out our stories. So I'm very interested in her opinion and how she interacts with people. So yeah, that's the story
wonderful.
Of Bling.
That's wonderful. And what does it mean to you that it's in Amsterdam now? Also with regard to the specific history of the Cullinan.
Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. It's so wonderful because one of the significant things about her name is Patsima. Patsima means sparkle in Setswana, which is one of my home languages. And I started the diamond actually immediately out in the public because I felt it was really important that South Africans and in particular Black South Africans would understand what it was that I was talking about. I needed to know that it would make sense. So I dressed up. I got a friend of mine to play my bodyguard. I printed out headshots and I just went out with vengeance. And it was so interesting for me to see how people interacted with me. And I went, okay, cool. So this can work. My people do understand what it is because everyone wants her to return. And also with the understanding that I find it so interesting that every time we speak about, bringing back, we want our things back, the person who has our thing will be like, yeah, but you can't look after it properly. And my feeling was always, yeah, but if it's our diamond, we're entitled to do whatever it is that we want with it. And I always say that, so if that means that we want to put it on the kitchen sink, then it's fine. It's mine. We can do what we want with it. So that's why I like her being out in the street. And with the public, because that adds to the story. Being in Amsterdam in particular is so incredible because this is where she was bruited, This is where she went from being whole and then being split initially into 9 and then 96. So really thinking about that and what that would mean and what that metaphor means for me as a me, to start to look at the rape of Africa also and what that means, to think about what it means to be split up into shards in so many ways across the world. So yeah, being here in that way has been so fantastic because it roots her even more. And it's almost like the more places that I play, because mineral history is everywhere in the world. So there's always an opportunity for her to respond literally everywhere. Amsterdam in particular has been so special. To be able to go to the Asher Museum, which is where she was bruited, was also so incredible. To also then track her response to that. How does she feel about returning here? What does it mean? What brings her here? So all of these questions, yeah. It's wonderful.
That's beautiful. And I love that satire plays such a big role in also how your conceptualization of these critical questions comes to being. Can you tell us a little bit more about the role that satire plays, but also how that kind of turns into an activist position for yourself?
I think what's also so important to point out is that I'm trained as classically, whatever that may mean, because honestly, Western standards are everywhere. But anyway, I've been trained as an actor, but also in clowning specifically. And so that was my lens that I entered through. I really wanted it. I wanted to be able to reach people, and the only way to do that is to almost seduce them in. And the clown is very, very good at doing that. So to make people feel seen and not judged, but also being very honest about what it is that I'm doing. So I would definitely call it maybe a soft satire, maybe. And the role of it was the second question about activism, right?
Yeah, how that turns into an activist position if you use satire.
Absolutely, because it encourages people to respond, right? Yeah. And especially because, as I said, with her, I really enjoy the seduction of it all. The fun, the glamour, but the truth is, underneath all of that, what is the cost? And then if you can leave with that question, it's not for me to answer it for you. So I've really, over the last month in particular, I've been thinking about Bling, and I've gone, this is actually the play is actually one slice of a much larger project for me, because I'm looking at a lot of questions, and she also exists beyond the theatre production, because I've been on the streets of Amsterdam with her, and I think that that's really important. So how I interact with people is the activism.
Yeah, how was that to take to the streets?
It's so fun, so fun, because her look in particular for the streets is very different than what it is in the theatre. I had people responding to me. Somebody shouted, they're like, "Hello, Lady Gaga!" And but what's wonderful is, even if they don't know necessarily initially that this is a play on the Cullinan Diamond, everyone just assumes, because of the way she feels like she's high status, everyone assumes that she must be a celebrity. And often because I have somebody with me who's documenting the process. So as soon as I've got my phone out and I'm doing this with you, you are going to assume that I must be important. Exactly. And again, it's that thing that's so beautiful. And then you go, okay, what is this about? And it's funny, as soon as I bring it up in this form, people become very, very curious at the history and really looking at it. And I think that's the role, that's my responsibility anyway, as an artist, as far as I'm concerned.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I mean, I really appreciate your passion also for this. And yeah, like you said, how you use this satire and everything. I've seen parts of the show already. You're funny. It's going to be a really interesting journey. For us. Hisham, how does these questions of the diamond returning to the soil, but also this idea of extraction and wanting to restore that, how does that intersect with your vision and practice as a curator?
Yeah. Thank you for asking me. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. And thank you for inviting me. I mean, you're speaking also of the earth and the encounter with people. I mean, it's a little bit different for me because I'm a curator and you're an actor. You're really into it, right? You're there. But as a curator, I had the chance to curate the Dutch Pavilion last year with the collective CATPC, which is actually the Plantations Workers Art League. And this is a collective of about 25 people living and working on the plantations that were left by Unilever. So that's another connection with the Netherlands, right? And they bought back land, by making artworks. That's what they did. So they make artworks and they sell these artworks and then they buy back the land. And this story unfolds like in the years. And when I'm involved, it becomes a pitch for the Venice Biennale, which we win. So, but there's a storyline there, that we need to follow. That is sort of, there's one thing of the collective. There's the other thing that the collective within the collective itself. There was this story that there is a sculpture that needs to come back to the people. And this sculpture is owned by the Pende, who live in these environments, right? The sculpture is at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And there's a series of films, plantations and museums, where you see this whole trajectory, where two people of the collective then travel to the United States to get this sculpture, right? This sculpture represents a massacre that was done in 1931, where this Belgian colonial officer was killed. Yeah. And in order to maintain the spirit of this officer, they made the sculpture. But this sculpture then vanishes, and then this person, Herbert Weiss, who is a collector, retrieves it in 1971 and sells it to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. So this is the story, right? Mm-hmm. So they need to get the sculpture back. And so they did that many times before, petitioned to get the sculpture back, but they didn't get it. And so you see this very plainly in the film. And this is very interesting to see, you know, when you talk about objects and restitution and what does it mean? You know, what does it mean for those people as well? And why do they want it back? Because that's a good question as well. So they don't get it back. But when we got sort of doing the Venice Biennale, then we petitioned again and we didn't get it. Then we wrote a letter, you know, to the board and asking for permission to show it at least, you know, because now we want to show it to the people. So what we did when we got the approval, we brought the sculpture back to Lusanga, to the place where it actually comes from. What we also did, we live streamed it to the pavilion of the Venice Biennale on the window that faces the Belgian pavilion. Mm-hmm. So you had this interplay, right? And you know, and this is very interesting. Through that whole path, you know, we went through all these things, like the same things as you were mentioning. You know, we can't give you the object back because of these reasons, right? Because you don't have a museum. And there is a museum, in fact, because Renzo Martins, part of this, who actually instantiated this whole idea of the collective, he built a white cube, you know, in 2017 in the jungle, which doesn't meet the conditions of museums, right? Because you have a 90% humidity rate. So the museum, in order for us to get the sculpture, they wanted us to make a conditions report, which we did. So we had all these sensors tracking humidity and everything for 3 months. We gave them the conditions report, right? Obviously, this was all sort of a curtain in a sense, right? But we did get it. And there's 3 films made for the Venice Biennale. One of them is The Return of Balie. And this actually tracks the Balie coming back to Lusanga at that moment. You see it coming back, you know? And we did a ceremony. And within this ceremony, you also see a very beautiful thing happening, is that the people of CHPC, part of this collective, and the community, they take out Balie from the casket, from the case, and they bring it back to the earth, because they put it back to where it belongs, right? Because the sculpture should touch the earth, because it needs to bring back all the good, right? So this is the spiritual element, right? So for the people of Lusanga, the idea of getting back the sculpture has nothing to do with anything that we perceive what objects should do when they are shown in museums, right? Because they are shown behind glass, they're shown on a pedestal, they're shown, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the exact opposite in a sense, no? So the earth is very present. It's always there, right? And it's important because we live from the earth. I mean, the main thread in this is actually the land itself, right? Because that's what they always would tell me. The jungle is our supermarket, right? You know, you go to the supermarket. This is our supermarket. You know, if you give us back the land, then it's ours, right? So that's what they need. And you know, they bought back 500 hectares, you know, and they built it back into agroforestry, which is an amazing story, you know? Yeah.
Can you relate to these? You mentioned also kind of an emotional landscape that object entered, if we even need to call it an object. But how did it feel for you to be part of this movement? How to contribute to this?
I learned so much. We made a catalog, and you know, the whole process. I recorded everything, so all the audio and everything, and transcribed this. And I tried to do this as much in their words, you know, rather than my words. Because I'm a foreigner in a sense, you know, I just come and see and observe. and it was very nice to be there with them to see how they communicate, how they, go through their issues, in a sense, which is actually based on many systems that were there before. There's a system of elders, there's a system of communing, there's a system of, helping each other and being with each other. And it's very communal in a sense, right? Everybody gets to speak. When you do kind of like a palaver, when you do that, it takes hours and hours because everybody gets to speak.
Yeah.
And I think it's so different than how we perceive sort of how we've built our ways of communing in the world that we live in here. So I've learned a lot, in those 2 years that I've been working on the project.
Yeah.
And on all different levels, all these things are actually connected, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate your answer. And I think that part of this is not only you being able, or the collective being able to find a pathway through this very complex art infrastructure, but also to have a firm belief in the speculative future, actually, of that thing actually returning, which is kind of similar to your belief in bringing back the diamond. And was that trajectory already clear when you made that pitch, or were you just like, this is the idea and let's go with it and we'll see what happens?
Yeah. This project, so the artist Renzo Martins has been working on this for quite a long time, and he's been in Congo for 20 years, and he's made many films. One of them, Enjoy Poverty, which is quite a film. I mean, so when I started working with him and the collective, I wasn't completely sure. We had a lot of debates on how to do these things. So for me, I've kind of studied or try to understand what it means to work with the idea of coloniality, or the idea of what it means to work with the subject of coloniality, right? And there are many ways of doing such things. So being him, a white man, being in Congo, filming, having the lens on someone, for me that was really difficult. And so we had, my ways of doing was to just ask questions, basically. And also not to judge anyone. Just observe, ask, much of a sort of an anthropological way. I don't want to, between brackets, right? Not like a Franz Boas kind of anthropological way, but an observant way, listening.
Yeah.
I think listening.
Exactly. So was then...
but that led, in fact, to ideas.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah,
so there was a trajectory, but I didn't agree. And together we formed sort of a way of doing this together with the collective. So, for instance, speaking in their words, because in Congo they speak French.
Yeah.
Here we speak Dutch. The Venice Biennale mostly is sort of international English. So there's all these barriers, right? Most of them are from the plantations. Most of them, they are descendants from plantation workers. They don't have an art education, etc., etc. So there's all these barriers, or what we call sort of bridging the L, of the colonial difference. We need to bridge the L to try to understand each other. So one of the ways of doing that is to understand who you are.
Yeah.
And then go from there.
Yeah. And as you went along, you used the infrastructure of the Venice Biennial more as a vessel to achieve this, maybe?
Exactly, because that was one of the things. The Venice Biennale is just one part of the trajectory. It's not the end. Exactly. There's all these principles,
So is in your practice, Afrovibes and the Balie also a vessel to achieve a larger movement, maybe?
I think so. I was saying yesterday, I think what would be really fun, to be honest, is imagine if the Cullinan Diamond did return. Like,
exactly.
How great would that be? And even to me, it feels a little bit ridiculous to say that aloud, but not more ridiculous than deciding to play a diamond. And I've already done that. So as far as I'm concerned, one might as well just keep pushing forward and seeing. And as I said, I found it's it feels to me anyway that the story of minerals and the story of objects is relevant everywhere. And also because, of course, as a black woman playing this role, it becomes so much more than just about a diamond, let's say. So, for example, I wrote a paper with a friend of mine called Extracting the Diamond. And in it, I also spoke about how one of the things that I had to look at was the idea of the black diamond. So I think it was about, let's say, early 2000s in South Africa. That was a term that was used very, very much that a lot of black women really didn't love, where it was almost the idea of, a black diamond, middle class, black woman who's making money, but maybe she's got a sugar daddy. There must be a story around it, And I was thinking about how much... it was the way that it was set up was so that all of us would have to be like, no, I don't want to be that, When in actual fact, you go, no, but what's wrong with a growing middle class that is getting wealthier, let's say? Of course, in the greater context of the world, we can talk about that too. But quite frankly, there's nothing wrong with us stepping up and being okay with doing that. So looking at her in that way too has been so interesting. Or even the idea of, as you were saying, being put in a cube and really being looked at. The pressures that a diamond has to go under, also what that means as a black woman, what that means. So there's been so much that I can pour into it that's also poured into me. So that's been really wonderful. So I found that it's sturdily becoming more and more. Yeah, that's actually just the word. It's becoming more.
It's very beautiful. You're sort of mirroring the Western desire.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And playing with it and twisting it
That's
and
great.
being like, okay, diamonds are a girl's best friend, sure, but why?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's Audrey Hepburn as well in the equation. She's
Yeah.
Dutch, isn't she?
Well, it's interesting that so much of your intentions have these similarities or these intersections that they are kind of touching upon each other. And I'd like to, just kind of hear more about audience reactions and such, because I think that creating this kind of speculative scenario for the diamond, does that repair something or some sort of connection? Because the boldness of it really speaks to me. Like, oh yeah, why not? Have you had such conversations around this movement that you're creating, that you see people kind of being reminded, like, yeah, why not?
Yeah, definitely. And it's been so interesting because we premiered initially in Vienna, and something that I'm really also super interested in is the fact that I haven't had the opportunity yet to play this show at home. Which is such a difficult thing because, as you say, well, to me anyway, and of course I'm biased, I go, of course, naturally, surely this is a story that we should be watching or at least engaging with in some way. But I found that a lot of people find it a bit too bold, a bit too experimental, which I'm just like, it's really, really not. So the pain of performing this everywhere but home is very, very bizarre. And it's also got to do with, you were speaking about land and about the earth, because that's one of the things that she speaks about too, Initially, she was trapped underground, she says. Her mother really held her down. She always knew she wanted to see what was happening above. And so she decides to leave. No, she doesn't decide to leave. She's extracted. And initially, what she thinks, what the world's going to offer her is very different from what it is that she actually gets. And then that longing to want to return to the land, then that longing to want to go back to Mother Earth because of all of what it is that she's been through. But I think that by way of audience responses, I think that she's a really wonderful character to get, to invite people to get reflective with themselves, which I've really, really enjoyed. But I also get very different responses when I'm outside than what I do when I'm in a theatre.
I get it.
So, for example, the first time that I went out with her, I put on this very faux British accent, but she obviously also speaks Setswana, which is one of our South African indigenous languages, because she would. And it was so interesting because we were out at a supermarket with a friend of mine who was playing the bodyguard, and it was the first time that I was doing this, And there was a white woman actually who got very angry she was so mad, and she just started shouting, and she was like, "This is colonialism, this is terrible, this is..." And I was just like, clearly I am playing something. But for some reason, she just couldn't see past that, you know, which to me was hilarious. And I loved that because I thought, okay, what is irking you about this? Why? Such an aggressive response to it. But a lot of people actually also fall in love with her. But it's also interesting because as soon as they hear who she is, as I said, they become interested, but then I can see there's this weird questioning. And you can start to see that they go, wait, but is it actually right that it's still there? And then they start to think beyond the Cullinan diamond because it's a rock, you know what I mean? We've got more painful things that need to come home. There's so many bones that have to return, you know, so many spirits that have to come home.
There you go.
That really, I'm also just using her as a metaphor for something much bigger.
Yeah. And so tonight we're going to learn how the diamond feels when returning home or in the pursuit of going home. Also because you speak so much to this identification. How would the one statue, the sculpture that you brought to Congo, how would it feel to come home for that object?
For the object.
Yeah. How do you think it felt?
It's strange because this object is in the image of a white man who was killed. So what the collective, in fact, did was turn the whole thing around because this was somebody that affected them. That, in fact, they give a spiritual sort of position, no? So it's a very strange situation.
Yeah.
So the objects probably feel shame, I guess.
In returning?
Yes. Yeah.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah. And to tell you, the story doesn't end. The story doesn't end because what happens, we get to do a show in the Van Abbe Museum. And then we decided the sculpture can go from Lusanga to the Van Abbe Museum. Then the granddaughter or the grandniece of Maximilian Balie, the person who was killed in 1931, emails us. She says, I'm the grandniece. You know, I want to come. I went to Venice. I saw the show. I didn't know. And she comes with all the letters of Maximilian Balie. So in the opening, we placed the letter that was 4 months prior of his death. We placed it next to the sculpture with her. So it was crazy. You know, so this whole thing of who is to blame or, you know, pain works in so many different ways, I suppose. So it was very nice gathering there, actually. Because what Balie explains in his own letter is that, you know, he has a vast area, you know, that he needs to sort of control. And he's doing that as a clerk. You know, this is a true banality that you see everywhere. Yeah.
And what does the theater activist in you thinks that how would it feel for the sculpture to come home? What do you think?
I think that's a good feeling around it. I also think it would be shame.
Yeah.
Because there is something about having to return that you then have to confront. You can think, you assume it's going to be one way. But the point is there's so much history that you also have to catch up with, and also that you have, as I said, you have to be confronted with, and that you also have to absorb. Because when you're away, you're not absorbing it. Similarly to, like, if I'm away from home at the moment, so there's that separation. There's a lot that I can hear about from home, but I don't get to be there experiencing it. And if I'm away from home for long enough, when I come back, if I've missed out on everything, I'm like, gosh, do I even still belong here? And there's always a shame in that, to be like, wow, traveling the world, doing the thing, wonderful, telling African stories, but they are from Africa. When I'm not home, I feel it. And kind of in the process, you change and the place you left change. Exactly. And also to be able to go, okay, I'm telling African stories. I really always feel like, yes, but then I have to return home. I have to touch ground to be able to say that is what I'm doing. Because otherwise, essentially, as you say, I am changed by each place. Not in a bad way, but it's just something I'm aware of. Are we also going to see what the diamond has missed out on? Maybe. Let's go. Come and see. Let's go. And also because we have to be a little bit mindful of the time, I'd like to quickly look into the audience if there are any questions now. I see.
let's see if we how we can do this. It's still on? Hello, hello? Yes. I'll have to go run.
Oh, good.
I'm going to start in the back and work my way to the front, okay?
Thank you. I'm Rochelle Bramdo. I live in the Netherlands for 30 years. And about 20 years ago, I went to see the colonial, and I cried. And I was surrounded by white people, and they didn't know what was going on. And they thought I got hurt, but then a few weeks ago, Amsterdam hosted Sail. And I went to Sail, but what the Dutch do is they don't realize that there are people who are affected by the fact that they expose all their colonial ships and they make these grand symbols of trophies. So I went to the Maritime Museum, and I stood at the, I was sitting on my disability car, and I was crying. And I thought, because I research a lot about this, I came to live in the Netherlands to research apartheid and the story of the Dutch. And it's very hard to live here, so I'm going to run away this December. But it's wonderful that you expose a story. Whether we get the diamond back is another story. They will not give it back to us. They probably give us something else. But Nefertiti was found in Egypt. It was taken by the Germans. Her breast still sits in the museum there, and they sent a piece of concrete back to Egypt. So there's always this question. Dutch don't feel the sense of responsibility. They don't give us anything to make our lives any better. So if you're a poor person living in the Netherlands, you're going to suffer. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Talking about where you came from and what the journey is like, right? Being confronted with sail and the big ships and everything, and like all these triggers, I totally get it. And wait, let's go to a second question. I already have much more ideas, but let's go to a second question next to it.
Hello, thank you guys so much for sharing. My name is Monica.
Hey.
I'm currently a master's student at the UvA in the restitution specialization. I came here specifically for that because we're not really talking about it to the extent or doing anything, honestly, in the US. So the Netherlands is kind of leading the way, whatever that may mean. But I was curious because there's a lot of discussions, especially from bigger museums, about the idea of a universal museum and how, they're kind of leading the way and showing, everyone should have the option to see these objects. It's kind of their position on restitution to an extent, which I disagree with personally, but whatever. But I was curious, I kind of look at restitution and looking at solutions from a dignity perspective, and I feel like that's an area that really is not given weight in determining, we talk about, not we, but there's the idea that certain countries of origins don't have the infrastructure to house their own objects, money, laws, all this like bureaucracy that prevents restitution. So I was curious, like as a curator, how you balance this idea of not only dignity of the countries of origin, but dignity in creating a narrative for whatever museum, because you do, I assume, want to give respect to these items, give respect to their stories with your responsibility to the museum or I don't know if you're employed by a museum, how that works, but but to your responsibility to, those stakeholders as well.
Thank you for the question.
Before you answer, I'm so sorry, I must
You have to
go.
leave, yeah? Oh,
Thank you so much for attending, everybody.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question. Yeah, I know, but we got to answer first from... I'm going to get to you.
Thank you for asking. There is a conference soon, like in 2 weeks. I think I can give it to you in a minute. I mean, It's the Mondrian Fund together with the World Museum. And there will be Eddie Ezulumumba, the curator of African art of Virginia, Museum of Fine Arts. He will be there. And together with other people, I mean. And I think he is more of a curator conservator. So I'm not a conservator. I'm a curator. I look at things through the subjects, right? Through the things that I'm interested in, and I'm more interested in what you're saying actually than in what happens on the ground, right? So, and I truly believe that it is about human dignity, for sure. So, for me, it's about the stories and not the objects. But there is definitely a debate on what to do with these objects, right? And this is also a political debate. It's a large debate, and it's an academic debate too, you know. So I don't know if we can get into that. I'm doing now a show on the colonial archive of IJmuseum, you know, the IJmuseum in the north, and I'm working. So this is 2,600 films. These are mostly propaganda films of Indonesia and Suriname and the Antilles. So these are the Dutch colonies, but there's a lot of colonies that are added to that. So there's, you know, everything happening in, you know, the Portuguese, and there is Sierra Leone, there's some African countries as well. And there's 10 artists working with these materials. So what we do sort of is look at restitution from that point of view, right? So from the point of view of what you could do with the archive in a way that responds differently than to the discussion that we need to have whether these objects go back or not, right? And many of these artists are working with this material, which is very hard to do as well, right? Because you're seeing all these things. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we have been talking about what to do with these films. Yeah? The IJmuseum hosts 50,000 films, of which then 2,600 are colonial. And how does one restitute film, right? So there's a lot of questions, I suppose, but I wouldn't be able to answer them. I'm not in that academic debate. So I'm a curator. I'm interested in the stories and in the way we can sort of open up discussions based on those stories. Something like what she's doing, you know, using humor or satire in a way to open up stories. Yeah, I hope it's some of an answer, but I can, if you want, direct you to some of the people that, you know, that work on these matters on a daily basis. Yeah.
And can you maybe explain to us who are not that familiar in the museum field what kind of influence you can have as a curator in these larger debates? Because you mentioned the scientific aspect of it, the conservator aspect of it, the political aspect, but you're kind of right in the middle, right? In creating these, exposing these storylines to the public as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'm concerned with the public.
Yeah,
that's what I do. You know, I'm concerned with questions that you put on the table that are not easily sort of solved. You know, they're not there to be solved. You know, it's also within an art perspective, right? Mm-hmm. So many artists that work on these matters. They, you know, there's all these things that you have to. One of the artists, Paula Albuquerque, for instance. So she blurs the faces of people on the films because she feels that we have no right, you know, to use their images because they don't know. So one of these questions is, how can you work with this kind of material of which the people that the camera lens is on have no idea? And what do we do with the people that come after, that are connected to that, right? So then that shifts the whole idea of the archive into something completely different, right? So that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
This is where I start to sort of move, right?
Yes, I get it. We have one more question and then we're gonna...
Yeah, you had a question. Yes. Yeah.
Let's do this for the recording.
Yes, so I was listening to what you were saying and multiple people mentioned narratives. So I was thinking, how do you feel about, or what is your experience with attempts to develop appealing scenarios for stakeholders on the other side of the argument, right? for developing appealing scenarios for them to return the diamond and other items. And I ask because I feel like this is also largely a cultural and spiritual matter. And I often notice that a lot of the things that people do and choices that they consider have to do with the role they believe they play in a situation.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you have ideas about that.
Yeah, and Savidi, she's not here, and maybe after that you can pose the question also to her if it's related to the diamond. But we did get to a solution with the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, where we, where the collective itself proposed to be the owner of the sculpture, so that the museum is not the owner, but they can keep the sculpture. If the problem is, the conditions, then they can keep the sculpture, but whenever they want to show the sculpture, they need to go through the collective. So that could be a solution to the problem of, not being able to have the infrastructure. And so that would sort of solve this sort of academic political situation. But I don't know, I think that's not the discussion that we are having, I think.
Well, it's also reimagining of an order that's in place in our infrastructure, like the ownership question of it.
But I debate museums per se.
Yeah.
Not even the objects. Museums are repositories of a colonial system by themselves.
They're colonial vessels.
They're colonial vessels, exactly. I'm very touched by your story.
Yeah.
Very touched, and I see this on a daily basis. I run an art academy with 31 nationalities, of which most of them come from the Global South. And I encounter these issues on a daily basis. And I'm in Maastricht, which is a very sort of white community. So we deal with questions of belonging or coloniality in that sense on a daily basis. And so for me, it goes much deeper than thinking about objects or what we should do with these objects. The colonial system is in fact a modern colonial system. It's connected to modernity. It's the modern colonial order. It's a mindset which designates itself as the center and as the only solution, and erased all other. In fact, as we say, it erased all futures. Yeah, that's quite a thing. So what do you do when it comes down to that?
Exactly. Buhle also touched upon it, that one of the many arguments is that the other place, the place it has to return to, doesn't have an adequate museum to host it in. Yeah. And that's also, it's a huge insult, of course, because you're also kind of implementing the Western way of how to develop an identity around schools, museums, theaters that I work at. Yeah. And like those are the things you have to implement before you are worthy to get something of value back. And that's something that I wanted to ask you, because it's interesting how these... I didn't want to make this too much about my own project.
Go ahead.
But there is an interesting intersection with the Museum of Black Futures, also with regard to satire, because one of the things we did was also do a press release that we were building the Museum of Black Futures because reparations money were coming in, which is not the case, of course. Okay. But that... that idea of that fantasy somehow triggered so many people to show up to that first event, and now it's, we're actually trying to make a Museum of Black Futures. But that idea of triggering this idea that there is another way possible, that there are new narratives possible, and also that there might be a way for us to hack into that system of what a museum is or what we think a museum is, so that it becomes more respective to communities, like Rochelle said in the back. Yeah. What would an ideal museum be for you? What would it be called? What would it do? How would it function? Would it even be a museum?
It would be a museum in that sense that it has a public, and there's all these structures that you have to adhere to when you run a museum. But then you can utilize all the imagination that one should have, when running a museum, in order to do it differently. And there's many ideas, but already entering this whole idea through the issue or through the name or title museum is already one of the things that you start with, in fact, and understanding yourself from the position, so which we call sort of positioning oneself, is a starting point. If you go to Van Abbe Museum, there is at the lower floor an exhibition about how the Van Abbe Museum came to be. So Henry van Abbe is a tobacco plantation owner in northern Sumatra, and so that museum was built with the proceeds of that, and it's very clear. I mean, it's historicized. It's and in that show you see stories of people, and you also see sort of lines of descendants, and so you do understand this relationship of the museum directly with the plantation. So I would say if one wants to position themselves, one could position themselves this way. There's other museums that have the same story, which is Stedelijk Museum, or Tate. They all are directly related to a history of sugar plantations, So I think this is where you start, your position.
And is it possible for a museum to divorce itself from extraction, in a sense?
We can never divorce ourselves from the history that we've all made. We are implicated in this history. That's what we do. But when we position ourselves as such, we actually acknowledge this entangled history. I think that's the first step we do. We can never go out of that. It's the same thing as one can ask you, can you exit the modern system that we are in? No, we can't exit the modern system, but we can know that we are implicated.
I appreciate that. I'm going to turn to the audience again once more. If there are any questions, yes, I thought so. Just a second. I'll go to the
In the context of returning objects, the Netherlands obviously has a lot of objects to return to Indonesia, and there's such a political question as where do these objects go, because Indonesia has such a mixture of so many cultures.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the Netherlands has decided to return them to the National Museum of Indonesia, I believe. But that means that these statues and oftentimes spiritual objects or even bones don't directly come back to the community they belong to, or the spiritual places they were extracted from. And I understand that putting conditionalities on a post-colonial state feels very neo-colonial, but does the Netherlands have a responsibility to make sure that these objects actually return to a community and not to a colonial museum in Jakarta, for instance?
Well, thank you for mentioning that. But in fact, they do, because there's a lot of institutions that work from a community-based structure. So the questions usually also come from communities that work together to get certain objects back. There's quite a few institutions in Amsterdam that do this, right? And they work directly with Rijksmuseum, or they work with all the other institutions. So there is a community-based sort of practice in that. Maybe not enough, I suppose, but you're right. Then it goes back, sure. And whether it then goes back to the community, whether they decide it goes back to the museum in Jakarta. Yeah, this is also where let's say back from an academic point of view, sure, that's where we are now. But for me, I don't want to speak for them, but for me it wouldn't be interesting, right? I wouldn't be interested in sort of reproducing, sort of the same system in that sense. So one could opt for another way. Maybe, they should decide the ways and the rules of play in a sense, and what to do with these objects. These are, as you said rightly, they are spiritual most of the time, and they are connected to many practices that actually are not there anymore. And usually this is the problem, right? There's a gap in between. I mean, the collective CTPC didn't know that this object existed, but they also don't have the rituals anymore. So all the rituals that they have done while getting the object back was new. So it's a whole different thing, right? So we're not only sort of getting objects back to a museum, we're actually restoring stories here. And they are new. You was talking about speculative. Yeah.
One more question. Just the last question.
Sure.
Oh, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Yeah.
It struck me that if the Cullinan diamond was returned, that it would put a lot of pressure on other people holding stolen objects.
Sure. Yeah.
So I was curious, is there anything else that you think could really kind of sway the tide? Or has there already
to get
been?
it back?
Well, not necessarily with the Cullinan diamond, but is there any object that you think if it was returned, it might put pressure on other places? Or is there already been an act of restitution that you think we can point to and be like, see, this is what we should all be doing?
Well, the Benin bronzes, it's a good example of that. Yeah, that put a huge pressure in the US, you know, on the many big museums. There's a huge pressure on museums right now. Yeah, you don't see the backstory, yeah? You don't see what's happening in the back, yeah. It's a whole political game, you know? I mean, it's like... But yeah, it would put a lot of pressure. But the question but then we go back to what do we do with them? I mean, that's the point. What happens? Are we sort of open? Do we have this conversation in Africa? That's the point. Are we having this conversation in Indonesia? This is where it needs to happen, right? And yeah. So this connection has to be made as well, right? It's not a conversation that can be held in conferences in the US alone, right? So true conservatorship is there, not in the West, you know.
And also the standards should be at least influenced by what people want from the object there.
Of course.
Exactly.
Because it's all community based.
Yeah. Well, and talking about, we could have gone on for hours. I see all of these people who wanted to ask questions, but we've run out of time.
No problem.
Hisham, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For your insights, for sharing your opinion, but also to give us a look into your agency basically as a curator, but also the options that you have, the tools that you have to kind of move this discussion forward. And I really appreciate Buhle, who's not here anymore, but may I please have a warm round of applause for Hisham and Buhle. So I can't wait to see this performance, and I hope that, we all realize that we are all on our way somewhere and that we're all arrivals here at this place.
Yes.
And let's see what moves we make after seeing Bling.
Yes. Yes.
Afrovibes. Shout out to Afrovibes.
Thank you.
See you later.